Hey guys, welcome back to another video. And I know it's been a while since I've posted, but I'm back again with as you can probably see, a tier list video. And this is going to be a tier list of every star from the 90s. And if that sounds interesting, please drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. And the last thing I'm going to say before I start um me doing this tier list is shout out to SMH24. They were the ones that, or they were the person that did most of this tier list. I only put on a few finishing touches at the end. But yeah, again, shout out to them. And yeah, let's get started. So the first player I have is Michael Jordan. Honestly, there's nothing really to be said here. He definitely belongs in S tier. Um, yeah, next. All right, next player is Charles Barkley, who he did lead his team to the finals during that era, and he was an MVP. So in my opinion, this does seem like a pretty easy A tier. And I'm allowing myself to basically switch up the tier list um even after I've already put a player in that place. So I'm not like just like locking players into their positions. If something feels wrong, I can switch things up as well. All right, next player, that is Dikembe Mutombo. Um, I would say that this is definitely B or C tier because of the fact that he is one of the greatest defenders of all time. I'm going to go ahead and put that in B tier. Definitely not at the level of someone like Charles Barkley, but also I think his defense was so elite in his era that he can't really go any lower than B. So yeah. All right, now we got Chris Mullin, who I would say this is a pretty easy B tier. He was definitely one of the better players from the 90s, probably like a top 15 player in the 90s and around Mutombo's level. So I'm definitely going to put him in the B tier as well. All right, now we have Glenn Rice, who I think this is gonna be C or D. I think he is one of the most underrated players of all time, probably. I think I'm gonna go ahead and put him in C tier. I could maybe put him in D tier if it feels too high for him, but yeah, I think he was a phenomenal player, so I'm gonna go ahead and put him in C tier. Now we have, I know you can't see his face, but I know that Alonzo Mourning wore number 33 for the Heat, so that is Alonzo Mourning. Again, this just feels pretty easy. He's definitely not as good as Charles Barkley, but he's definitely better than Glenn Rice. I think this is a pretty easy B tier. He's probably on the same level as like a Chris Mullin or Dikembe Mutombo. All right, now we have Penny Hardaway. And this is a little bit of a weird scenario just because he got hurt so early on in his career. But when he was healthy, he was a great player. I'm leaning either B or C tier. Um, just because he was injured and he doesn't have sort of longevity like that, I will put him in the C tier. Again, this could change. All right, now we have David Robinson. And definitely, one of the best players in this era. He won an MVP. He did win a championship. This is definitely an easy A tier. I'm trying to think if I only want Michael Jordan in S tier. Um, but yeah, I don't think like David Robinson is that elite that he would be an S, but I definitely think A is the right place for him. All right, so now we have Chris Webber, who it's funny because I typically think of Chris Webber as more of a 2000s guy than a 90s guy. But he was a solid player on the Washington Bullets alongside Juwan Howard. So I think the right place for him, though, I just don't really want to put him in the same tier as Penny Hardaway. So I'm going to put Chris Webber in D tier. And honestly, it only seems fair to drop Glenn Rice down to the D tier as well. I think Penny Hardaway was a little bit of a step above those guys. All right, now we have Dennis Rodman, who again, that's an interesting scenario because he never, like, led hit a team to anything, but, he was the 3rd option, 3rd or 4th option on 2 dynasties, so he's definitely one of the most winningest or yeah, winningest players in NBA history. He just I don't know, like, I would say he's not as talented as a guy like Chris Webber, but he might have had more success than Chris Webber. So this is an interesting scenario. He's also a phenomenal rebounder, and he did win a DPOY. So I'm gonna put him alongside Penny Hardaway in the C tier, just because he has 5 rings, a DPOY. Um, yeah. All right, next player we have is Clyde Drexler, who is probably one of the better players in NBA history to never win an MVP. I also think he's super underrated. He led his team, the Portland Trailblazers, to 2 finals appearances in the 90s. And even though he never won an MVP and Barkley and Robinson did, I think this is an easy A tier for Clyde Drexler. He just happened to lose to um, one of the greatest, if not the greatest player of all time, in Michael Jordan. But there was a time where he was the second best player in the world. So I definitely think that's an easy A tier. All right, next up we have Karl Malone, who never won a championship, but did win 2 MVPs and was definitely one of the best players of his era. I kind of thought about putting him in S tier. I just think that's a little bit too generous. I'm gonna go ahead and put him in A tier. He definitely, whoops, A tier. He definitely wouldn't be any lower than A tier. So yeah, I think A tier is the right spot for Karl Malone now. All right, next player we have is Drazen Petrovic. So this is an interesting while also being a sad case because um, he was, on an All NBA team, and he was a great player and a great shooter, but he ended up sadly passing away kind of right at the peak of his career. So this is sort of tough, but in this case, I'm just gonna go his prime, and although I do think he's a great player, I don't think he was at the level of, like, Glenn Rice or Chris Webber. I don't think he belongs in F tier. Um, so I think I'm gonna put him in the E tier. He'll be our first person in the E tier. All right, so next player we have is Joe Dumars. That's not Isaiah Thomas. Joe Dumars was the one that wore the number 4. Uh, I think Isaiah Thomas wore like 11 or something. So a lot of people don't know this, but Joe Dumars during the time of the Bad Boy Pistons, he was actually pretty young. So after that dynasty sort of ended, arguably his prime years were yeah, after the Bad Boy Pistons ended, he just never really led that team to anything, and then Grant Hill sort of took over as the best Pistons player. So because of that, I kind of don't know where to put him. He was the second option on a team that won a championship in the 90s. So because of that, I think I'm going to put him in the C tier. He also won a Finals MVP. I apologize. I forget if that was 1989 or 1990. So just because of that, I definitely won't put him any higher than the C tier, but I also think that he belongs ahead of like Glenn Rice and Chris Webber. All right, so next player we have is Dominique Wilkins, who you could say his prime was the 80s, but he also was a phenomenal player in the 90s. He led the Hawks to the playoffs. He made multiple all NBA teams. So yeah, and his athleticism was definitely still there. I think that this is a perfect B tier. Um yeah. All right, so now we have Gary Payton. And this is interesting because I think that I could put him in either A or B. That's pretty much the conversation. He did lead his team to the finals. Um he never won an MVP. I don't know how close he was to winning an MVP, but I would say he's not as good as of a player as like Barkley, Robinson, Drexler, or Malone. I also just think he's a tier above guys like Mullen and Mourning and an older Dominique Wilkins. So in that case, I will put him at the end of the A tier. Just because he did lead his team to the finals, and I think that's a little bit disrespectful to put him any lower than the A tier. All right, so next player is Grant Hill. And again, this is sort of a weird situation because um he was a phenomenal player when healthy. He finished top 3 in MVP voting one year. Um he just kind of got injured early on in his career, but Pistons Grant Hill was quite the athlete. Um so in that case, I think I'm going to put him in the D tier um, along with Chris Webber and Glenn Rice. He was definitely better than them. I just feel like with, longevity, um, I just don't think I can put him with, winners like Dennis Rodman, Joe Dumars. And then I also would say that peak Penny Hardaway was better than peak Grant Hill. I might change it because it is pretty close. I'll actually put him at the top of D tier. It is close. Okay, so now this is interesting. I have Akeem Olajuwon, and this it's obviously either an S tier or an A tier. He is definitely the second best player of the 90s. He won an MVP and he led the Rockets to 2 back-to-back titles. Um I know this might be controversial. I just think that Michael Jordan was too dominant in the 90s. I want to give him kind of a tier of his own. I will put Olajuwon at the top of the A tier because I think that's where he belongs. All right. Next player is Kevin Johnson. Um and he never, was that main guy on his team, but he's also a good player. I think I'm going to put him in the E tier. All right, so next we have Mark Price, who was a great player. He led the Cavs to the conference finals appearance, and he was on at least one All NBA. I think I'm gonna put him in the D tier. I think the D tier is the right spot. I could go C. I'm kind of thinking about this. You know what? I'm gonna put him in the C tier, and I'm gonna move Dennis Rodman back down to the D. I just think that Dennis Rodman, although he's very famous because of, some drama things, as a player, I think Mark Price is better. And I think Dennis Rodman, offensively, he's just too weak for me to put him in the C tier with guys like Joe Dumars and Penny Hardaway. I did change my mind, but like I said at the start of the video, I am allowed to do that. Um, I also think I'm gonna bump Grant Hill up to the C tier. He was an MVP, top 3 finisher, so, despite longevity, I think that he belongs in C tier. So yeah, I did just make several changes, but I did say I'm allowed to do that. All right, so I guess back to these new players. This next player is Mitch Richmond, who is honestly one of the most underrated players, in NBA history, in my opinion. He's like a 6-time All-Star. Um, probably the best Sacramento King. Uh, before Chris Webber of all time, not counting like players who played on the Cincinnati Royals like Oscar Robertson. I think I'm gonna put him in the D tier. Um, with Glenn Rice, Chris Webber. I think that feels about right. Dennis Rodman. Yeah, I think that is a good place to put him. All right, next we have Mookie Blaylock, who was a good player. He was an absolute stud defender. Just compared to people on this list, he will be our first F tier. I do think he was underrated. I just don't think, like, compared to these other players, that he's as good as them. So yeah, he will be our first F tier. All right, next player is Patrick Ewing. Um, I think this is just a completely easy A tier for Patrick Ewing. Definitely not in the S tier. I also just don't think he should be in the B tier. So, yeah, that feels pretty straightforward. All right, next we have Brad Daugherty, who was a good player for the Cavs, made multiple All-Star games. I think I'm gonna go ahead and put him in the E tier. He was a bit better than Mookie Blaylock, and I think, around the same level as someone like Kevin Johnson is the right place to put him. All right, so next we have Reggie Miller. Um, and I don't want to put him in A tier just because I think he wasn't as like, I don't want to say dominant because like Gary, you wouldn't think of Gary Payton as dominant, but I don't know how close he came to like winning an MVP, which most of these other guys did. But he definitely shouldn't be lower than B. So I think I'm gonna put him at the top of B tier. Next we have Scottie Pippen, who will probably go down as the one of the greatest, Robins of all time. I think I'm gonna put him in the B tier. I just can't put him any higher because he was never a primary option, but I also can't put him any lower. He'll go right behind Reggie Miller. So next we have Shaq, and although his prime is the 2000s, he still led his team to the finals in the 90s, and by the end of the 90s, he was one of the best players, so I'm going to go ahead and put him in A tier. I'll try and move through these more quickly now. All right, now we have Sean Kemp. I think that I'm it's going to be either B or C. I'm going to put him in, I'll say C tier. One of the best dunkers of all time and um made numerous all NBAs. So yeah. All right, so now we have one of the greatest point guards of all time in John Stockton. I'm either leaning bottom of A or um top of B, and I'm gonna go ahead and put him in A tier because even though he was never the primary option, he was just like one of the all-time leader in steals and assists, I'm pretty sure. And yeah, he's too good to be in B tier in my opinion. And then I'm gonna go ahead and put Gary Payton at the back of A tier. I was thinking about putting Gary Payton in B tier. I just think leading your team to the finals is a big accomplishment. So I'll stick with A tier for Gary Payton. All right, next player, Tim Hardaway. I think I'll go C tier. Um, I think that seems fair. Very skilled player. All right, next player is Allen Houston. Um, I I do think he was underrated. This is interesting. I'm gonna put him at the top of E tier. Um, he was one of the best players on the Knicks in the late 90s on sort of that second Knicks team where Patrick Ewing was a bit older. So I don't think he's F tier, but compared to the rest of these players, again, think he can't be any higher than really D tier. So yeah. All right, next we have Dan Marley, who was a good player. Just compared to the rest of these guys, I will have to put him in the F tier. Um, all right, next we have Derek Coleman, who was a very good power forward for the Nets. Just didn't really give them much playoff success. Uh, I am gonna put him. I feel like E tier is really the only one that works. So yeah. All right, next we have Detlef Schrempf, who was a great Seattle Supersonic. He was kind of more of a third option though, even though he made multiple All-Star appearances. So I'm not gonna put him that high. I think again, the E tier is pretty safe for guys sort of like solid second or third options. That's where I'm gonna put I'm gonna put those guys in the E tier. All right. Next player, Charles Oakley. Um, it's either gonna be E or F. I'm kinda leaning more F. Um, Good player, I just think, less skilled than guys like Brad Daugherty or, Derek Coleman or Detlef Schrempf, so yeah. Alright, next player, you can't see his face again, but that is Horace Grant. Sadly, I'm gonna put him in the F tier as well. He was an all-star. He was only an all-star for 1 year, um, and he was only, like, the 3rd option, so, yeah. Alright, next player is Larry Johnson, and he was a beast, back for the Hornets. I'm debating whether I should put him in D or E, and I'm leaning D tier. Um, so yeah, I think D tier is the right place to put him. All right, next player is Latrell Sprewell. I think that's how you pronounce it. Um, I'm gonna go ahead and put him in E tier. Uh, yeah, I think that's the right place for him. All right, next player is Isaiah Thomas, who you obviously think of him as more of a 80s player, but he did lead his team to a championship in the 90s, and I believe he won. I can't remember if that's the year he won Finals MVP or it was 1989, but still, he led his team to the finals. I will put him at the ah, it's just for longevity purposes. I'm gonna put him in the B tier. I just don't think he can compete with guys like David Robinson or Charles Barkley, um, because of longevity. All right, next player is John Starks. Again, he was kind of a 3rd option. Just I don't feel like he's as good as like Brad Daugherty or Latrell Sprewell, so I'm gonna put him in F tier as well. All right. Next player is Terry Porter, who was the 2nd option on a team that went to the finals multiple times. For that reason, I'm going to go ahead and put him in the E tier. All right. Now this is interesting. This player is Tim Duncan, who obviously was a player mainly from the 2000s, and he was even drafted in 1997. So he only played 1998 and 1999 in the 90s. He only played 2 years in the 90s. However, Finals MVP is important, and he was already a really good player, even though he was only in his early 20s. So for that reason, I will put him. I think I'm leaning B tier. Um, and again, this is a little interesting, again, because it's a player that didn't really play that much in the 90s. It's Magic Johnson, who, although obviously you think of him as a player from the 80s, um, he did make uh various or multiple all NBA teams in the 90s, and he did lead his team to a finals appearance in the 90s. So I am gonna go ahead and, again, similar to the Isaiah Thomas or Tim Duncan case, I'm gonna go ahead and put him in B tier because it's a longevity factor. And last player, probably one of the most underrated players. I know I keep saying like all these guys are underrated, but I definitely think this guy is, and it's Vin Baker, who was a great Milwaukee Buck back in his time. And looking at this list, I'm gonna go ahead and put him. I'm gonna say at the back of D tier. I think that is the right place to put him. And yeah, that's my tier list.